Hello, you two.
Hello.
Hello, YouTube.
You guys want to introduce yourselves?
I have an announcement to make.
Okay.
I've decided I'm non-binary.
Oh,
That's why you can see. It's obvious that I'm non-binary, right?
yeah, bushy brows and a pink wig. Or, I mean, sorry, it's not a wig. That's your authentic self. Hair.
It is.
Hair self.
It's my authentic self. Finally.
That is so brave of you.
Yeah.
That is so impressive.
Stunning and brave.
Yeah. I'm a pussy.
I've heard a lot of people say that on Twitter, Benjamin, and I've told them every single time I don't think so, but it sounds like this is where you're admitting it.
Yeah.
He's claiming his identity finally.
It's National Coming Out Day. I also have 5 wives and 20 cats.
That is so brave of you to admit.
Yeah.
What do you
beautiful.
have to admit, Corinna? What do you have to admit? Anything?
Well, I am an adult human weirdo. Is basically I'm coming out as just a strange person.
Oh, we can bully you?
Yeah. You know the thing here is though that without a joke, it's been about a year since I've described myself as a trans woman. I just call myself a transsexual. I'm not trying to get anybody to affirm me as a woman or in that category. So I guess.
Were you before?
I've gone through an evolution of sorts where at one point I thought calling myself a trans woman was reasonable because it differentiated myself from natal women or biological women. And then I thought transsexual woman was even more clinical, and so that maybe that was a better word. And then I just use the word transsexual now because that reflects that I've had some medicalization. But there are some people who will even call me a man, and I'm not freaking out about it. Like my very mean co-host, Nina Paley, who will remind me sometimes very loudly, "You are a man, Corinna." Which, it's fine.
You're not traumatized.
No, I do have unexplained crying jags right after recording with her, but who knows why?
That's probably just your trans period kicking in, right?
Clearly, yeah.
But Corinna, you're not a detrans. You're not a detransition. You've not detransitioned.
I've not detransitioned, but I've stopped identifying as a part of the trans community. It's not clear to me where I even have a role among people who identify as the opposite sex, because I don't identify as the opposite sex anymore. I've stopped doing that.
So, do you care about pronouns? Do you have preferred or do you just not care? Or
I have preferred pronouns, but it's shattering to me that nobody uses them. I'd like to be called Your Highness or Your Majesty or Your Lordship is okay. I'm non-binary, but it's just whatever people decide to call me, I accept that. And it's been producing some unusual moments because I play tennis. I'm just a learner. I'm not playing competitively, but in my class, I have just dressed in whatever's comfortable to play in, which is usually just shorts and a t-shirt or top. And I've asked people to use a shorter version of my name that's gender neutral. And that results in about 2/3 of people calling me she and a couple of people calling me he. And it's this weird sort of state of dissonance that I'm in.
You're queering the tennis court.
I don't mean to be. I am actually working at cross purposes to what most of my activism is about. But yeah, just trying to be more natural and not trying to Dylan Mulvaney up the environment around me is really creating some more confusion than I expected.
Do you have a girl mode and a boy mode, or is it just Corinna mode all the time?
No, it's weirdo mode. It's weirdo mode. Okay. So,
this kind of, go ahead.
No, please.
This kind of brings up something I was thinking about recently. I've seen, I think I'm sure all three of us have seen a person named Casey, KC, and I can't remember what the last name is, who went viral. And I don't know if she wants to be called he or she, it doesn't matter. But basically she was just saying, okay, this is what happens with testosterone. See my receding hairline, see the hair that I have on my face. It's not going away. I don't think I'm going to detransition, but I'm whatever. I'm not sure what I'm going to do in the future. And that's just the latest example of, and of course people jumped on her from both sides. Some of the trans activist stuff was so unbelievably nasty and cruel, which is ironic because they want to kick people off Twitter for saying anything even vaguely what they consider to be transphobic. But the bigger topic I kind of wanted to touch on is, and I'm sure you have opinions on this, Corinna, is sometimes in certain sectors, there's this, detransition now then. Come on, detransition, you're in touch with reality, just detransition. And it's like, okay, I just don't understand that because a lot of people, for a good reason, are fighting against child transition because of the permanent changes, okay? Especially with girls, right? We know T has permanent changes. And, people are fighting like, let's not do this. Let's slow it down. Okay, then you have a person who is now experiencing and has for years those irreversible changes. And you're supposed to just sort of wave a magic wand and say, yeah, okay, detransition now. Really? Why don't let's walk in that person's shoes. So you want this person to go in women's bathrooms every day and deal with whatever that is. That's just one example of what a person might go through. And I'm just struck by the lack of compassion on all sides, especially when people go further down the road. There's a pretty bright line when people decide to have genital surgery. And again, Casey is just the latest example I've seen of this kind of intolerance. Not everyone can detransition. So there's my little soapbox.
Richie, who is a detransitioner, he's been on my show several times now this year, has not gone off of estrogen. It's a male to female, back to male, but because of the masculinizing properties that would occur going back on testosterone, it would mess up their appearance and their identity even more. Like, he says he would basically look like a detrans girl or a trans woman at this point, because the going from feminization back to masculinization with the hair growth and hair loss and all that stuff. And it's just such a potent cocktail. So I think everybody has their own row to hoe, and it's not just a lack of compassion, it's a lack of patience and nuance. And you divide this up into kids transitioning, slowing that down, stopping that. You divide that up into where's all the money coming from. Corinna, we should talk about your Pride event story, the whole gender ideology thing. There's all these different forces, and it's a political playing field, and everybody's trying to get their way. And they're probably all trying to, do what they think is right for the most part. Everybody's motivated by that, but the people who are caught up in this, in which this is inscribed into their bodies, I think they deserve their own space to have their own voices heard and to make their own choices. But
to be fair, I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance for people when you see a trans person, however you want to say it, trans-identified person who is whatever, gender critical. Mars is another person like that, And, Scott Nugent has become a big activist. And I think people go, well, oh my God, but you're still doing it. How can you still be doing it and be critical of it? But, life is full of gray areas. I'm sure Corinna has thoughts on this topic.
When you have committed so much and have built so many relationships and have established yourself in the world, I hate to conflate the terms identity, because there's not just your identity groups, but there's everything that you have built up in your life that people associate with you as an individual. When you have done all of that, and you have also been through the medicalization process, it is not possible to snap your fingers and then be in the world as a unexceptional member of your natal sex. It's just not possible. We saw that with Casey, and it's going to be the case with Richie, be the case with me as well. I could not just walk into my workplace and tell everybody, hey, I'm just one of the guys now. That would create a lot of dissonance with people. People who have known me for years would have to develop some other form of relationship with me. So it's not just about, hey, why aren't you consistent? Why don't you act like all the other guys? Or Casey, why don't you just start acting like all the other girls, or be in the world just like all the other women are? It's not like that. There are very deep treads that we have laid into the world that we can continue to run in.
Yeah. Which is just to add, those of us who are critical or at least skeptical of child transitions should really understand that, because that's exactly what we're saying. Don't make irreversible changes when you're so young that you don't know what the ramifications are.
So if a trans person has a dead name, does a detrans person have an undead name? And is that kind of Halloween theme? Because that'd be kind of cool.
From what I understand, there is a very high cringe factor to having your trans name brought up. Because for people who detransition, it, I think, brings back a certain amount of shame and embarrassment at having gone through a phase where you had a trans identification.
Mm-hmm. So, Corinna, could you talk to us about the Pride event that you went to? Because it sounded like you noticed something of a sociological nature there.
I live in Indiana, and there is a small town, rural town of about 3,000 people in about central Indiana. It's called Spencer. And they have become somewhat famous for having an annual Pride event in October. In fact, very unusually, the town even has its own LGBTQIA plus community center that operates all year round. So I went to this Pride event. They had somewhere around 50 vendors at the show. And some of those vendors were local services here in Indiana. So we're having a Heterodorx podcast that gives all the details on this that should be out soon. But there are two services in particular that I'll tell you about. One is called the Indie Youth Group, which is a venerable services group in Indianapolis that was created to support young gay and lesbian people back in the 90s. At their table, at their booth at the Spencer Pride, the only thing that they had at all were pronoun things and gender things. They had ALOC's book, they had a book on trans and queer identities, they had all of the pronoun stickers you could get, and all of the volunteers at the booth were they, thems. And I went to the booth, and I just like to go and ask questions, but I said, hey, if I were a young lesbian or if I were a young gay man, and I came to your booth and I saw this, I wouldn't see anything at all that says gay or lesbian. I wouldn't see that there would be anything for me here. So what's up with that? And the volunteer said, of course we support gays and lesbians and queer kids. But the thing that the young people are really into right now is gender identity. Well, that's all you're offering. So maybe that's all you're seeing. But I have heard from two other sources, one which is a volunteer for that group, and one who is a parent of a child who has attended that group. And from what I hear, it is just all gender. So I have no idea what young lesbians and gays are doing that actually need that sort of support, because if they try to go to the indie youth group, it sounds like mostly they're going to be indoctrinated into the gender mindset. So there was a second group that was exhibiting at the Spencer Pride, which is an Indiana group, which is, it's like, I could say it's Indiana mermaids. That's basically what they are. They're called Gender Nexus. And they support adults, but a lot of what they do is help parents raise trans kids, like Mermaids does. And there, I went and I talked to one of the volunteers who looked like he was a nice, presentable young gay man, which I caused immeasurable offense by making that assumption because he's non-binary and not a man. But I asked, well, what is Gender Nexus doing to support your clients who desist or detransition? Because this is something that's happening more and more now. And he said, well, all of the kids who are in our program want to move forward. And I said, yes, of course, that's what you do before you detransition, is you move forward and you transition. But then after you do that, then you detransition. So how are you supporting them? And this became a very contentious discussion very quickly. And I pointed out, not to be crass, hopefully on this program, but I said, a lot of young gay men are going through this and having their dicks cut off. And this makes them sexually dysfunctional. And I would think I'm assuming that you're a gay man, and that would really bother you if that happened to you. And that's when I learned. I was, of course, very mistaken. I was speaking with a non-binary man of indeterminate sexual orientation. But he did not want to take into consideration that part of what his work is now is taking young gay men and young lesbian women and making them, to some degree, sexually dysfunctional. So it's worth going to these things. I think that if you are part of the community, if you're gay or lesbian or something else in the community, that it is worthwhile to go to these types of events and engage people kindly, not aggressively, not in a mean way, but to ask questions which ought to have good answers.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you see what's happening online with, take for instance, Gays Against Groomers, I don't know if I can say that, and the LGB Alliance, if gays and lesbians wanted to go to a pride event and just focus on lesbianism and homosexuality, male homosexuality, they'd probably get run off. So it's a self-reinforcing loop. It's selecting for people who believe in this and then promoting this, and then selecting for people who believe in this and promoting it anymore. The wheels are going to come off eventually, but it doesn't seem like they have any, there's not going to be any balance. And even if you did try to show up there, you'd probably have to, at some point, if your presence and your footprint grows big enough where you say sex, not gender, then you're going to start getting blowback, and it's going to be an unpleasant pride event for you.
It could. Hopefully it wouldn't escalate to a physical attack, but it's happened recently.
Mm-hmm. Fred
So,
Sargent. Can we say who Fred Sargent was? Yeah. One of the original Stonewall people here in the U.S., right? 70-something years old, and was physically attacked for wearing what did this? I think his shirt said "gay, not queer." I don't know if there was more than that, but it's recorded. Yes. But you brought up the Gays Against Groomers, and you guys are aware that there was a demonstration at the American Academy of Pediatrics conference convention? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's something you said, Corinna. You are a very reasonable person, and you're really good at engaging people across all. I mean, at least on Twitter, I see you at least trying to talk to just about anyone. And I know at that event, and you're reasonable and calm and you're moderate, okay? That event was interesting because, there was a group of parents and some others, I believe it was called Do Not Harm. They got together to do the thing. They got up and started speaking, and they were just yelled over, right? People sticking the signs in their faces. They eventually went inside and held the event inside with just themselves. I mean, it's good. I'm sure there were some recordings. At least you could hear what they had to say. And then there was Gays Against Groomers out in the street directly confronting people. I don't know if you've seen some of the clips. They're pretty amazing. And I know there was some contention about the whole thing. One side was like, we need to be calm. We need to try to engage. We don't want to get into any trouble. Gays Against Groomers, whatever you think about them, they are definitely street activists. And they're like, no, we're going to get in people's faces and we're going to yell about this. And I guess my feeling is there's room, let 1,000 flowers bloom, right? I think that street activism has its place and getting in people's face. Is it changing people's minds? I don't know. It certainly gets cameras.
Yeah. Are they shaking tambourines and shouting, repent, motherfucker, repent, motherfucker, repent?
Although there were people like that there, too. I saw some, the usual people who've been there for, 50 years. Every time gay people come out to demonstrate, you're going to hell and all that. Yeah. But, I mean, they are a different... This is something new. Very angry street activist gay people. And, I mean, I have to think it's a positive thing. It's not the only way.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you guys think?
Well, I would rather that sort of pushback come from that community rather than let's bring up the good old boogeyman Proud Boys, right? Or Westboro Baptist 2.0, right? So if things need to get kind of down and dirty and shouty and loudy, it should be from that community who's being eugenically diminished by gender ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people actually know. What I think we probably all know is that especially with this is the data, especially with early onset gender dysphoria, there's a lot of pre-gay children who fit that. So the Gays Against Groomers drives around with their van and their posters saying, stop sterilizing gay kids. And that's a very different angle, obviously, from the Westboro Baptist Church that thinks all gay people are going to hell,
Well, it does seem like there are two sides to this, though. There is the stop sterilizing gay kids side, and then there's the let's continue to sterilize gay kids side. And we know which side has the moral high ground right now. That is the side that is in favor of sterilizing gay kids, of course.
Well, yeah,
it's not the moral high ground.
Well, if Jon Stewart's on your side, you know that you have the moral high ground. Come on.
Oh, of course.
Let's be honest here, right?
What a disappointment. I mean, that interview, that woman from Arkansas could have done a lot better. She didn't seem to be well informed at all. And then people are saying, yeah, well, that was on purpose, right? He wouldn't have picked somebody who knew their stuff. I guess. I don't know.
I'm curious who else he talked to and decided not to include into the final program.
Right.
I'm curious if he's going to actually think through what he's done or if he's so well insulated in that moral high ground that he doesn't have to give this a second thought. Because it's really easy to discount sides that... the moral calculus... Even if he's experiencing cognitive dissonance, and just trying to think if he realizes what he's contributing to. Let's just say 100 extra kids get surgeries because of him that are needless. I don't know how you do that math. If he has to think, well, is this all good or all bad? And am I responsible for this? And do I have any path to apologize? Because it doesn't seem like he would be allowed to do that. He couldn't, he's kind of made his choice, right? I don't know if you can come back. Good
progressives, right? If you're a good progressive, I mean, this is so ridiculously polarized, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I mean, another thing, something I have mixed feelings about, in the last, how long has it been? Year or two, we've suddenly got some extremely high profile conservatives, right? Like Matt Walsh, like Chris Rufo, self-described conservatives, and some of them religious conservatives getting heavily, heavily, heavily into this. I have mixed feelings about it because those of us who don't really fit that category, it's not a question of getting credit. It's not a question of, oh, I was there first. Can you look at me? I started talking about it first. It's more like I don't want it to stay marginalized because it is not a right-left issue, ultimately, But it's really easy if the only people, who have oxygen are the movement conservatives going, yeah, we're conservatives and we're against this. All the liberals are on board. It's just frustrating. I don't know what the answer is, but
it is becoming more polarized, and I blame the left for the polarization in this case, because there has been a 5-year runway for people on the left who've known about this gender issue coming up to have the ability to know that there's debate and to understand that there's no hatred, that there are just different points of view on what is helpful for children and what is harmful for children. Or if you take even the broader part, but as far as I'm concerned, it's really what we're doing with children, which is the most urgent ethical question and legal question. But this whole 5-year period that they've had to understand the issue, they have chosen not to have any engagement with people like me who have been through the process and have tried to reach out and have worked to be moderate on the issue. I am very open to listening to different points of view, to steel manning different viewpoints, to considering evidence that isn't necessarily strong, but trying to at least say, well, let's take the best case for this evidence and see what we have to understand from it, if in case it's replicated, in case there's a stronger evidence for this, what are the implications? Nobody that I've been able to find on the left who will even deign to talk to me will take the next step and enter into a considerate debate or discussion about where we ought to be going with this. It's just completely stonewalled.
Well, it's interesting. You got that op-ed, though. Was it in the Post or was it the New York Times? I can't remember.
The Washington Post.
Right. So that's a step. And I mean, there's been some other op-eds and articles appearing that we weren't seeing. So, I mean, I guess that's progress. I mean, it's not a direct dialogue, but it's, Erica Anderson got something in the Post, right? Edwards Leeper. There's a series, you've seen the Reuters series of articles. I mean, definitely we're seeing some penetration into the mainstream media with it, at least.
What's the Reuters articles, their thesis or point of view?
So there's three that I've seen so far. One of them talks about it's actually a very important article. They got data from, I forget what it's called. It's hard to get data in the US because we don't have a national health system. So the NHS can say, oh, we've seen this in percentage increase in girls wanting to transition. They looked into insurance data and saw the same kind of uptick we're seeing elsewhere. And of course, most people say it's underreporting because that's only the cases that insurance covered. There's plenty of people paying out of pocket and so forth. So that was a hugely important article they did. Then they did sort of an in-depth article. I think they were interviewing people on both sides of the issue. And then just yesterday, they came out with something basically talking about how the NHS is tightening up its standards and gatekeeping, for lack of a better word, for trans kids. So Reuters, I mean, what? Yeah, Corinna, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I hadn't even seen that. There's so much coming out every single day now that it's easy to miss major things because there's just so much more information every day.
So that's positive, right? I mean, in the sense of the information is getting out there more. Or the debate, I should say. The debate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the reason why it's occurring or it's such a hot, it's receiving so much attention is because the previous progressive push or the previous left push was about race. And I think people are just tired of it. I mean, it's still going on and stuff, but after 2020 and all that stuff, I think people are just kind of done talking about it. And this was kind of the next thing to go to. You have your different civil rights. It would go race. Well, in America, it would go black people, then women, or women then black people, depending on what your perspective is. And then you have homosexuality rights, and then there's like a kind of trifecta of race, sex, and this gender stuff, or sexuality, and then women's rights. That kind of takes the top pivot on what are we going to try to change or refine. And the dynamics of the left adopting, well, I mean, it's in their code of ethics now that Zelensky's rules for radicals. They're all a bunch of commies right now. It's just you vilify anybody who's not on board. They've adopted techniques of gaining power, and they've gained all the power, but they're still addicted to the techniques of gaining power. So they purge themselves. And when I first heard about TERFs, it was back when I was breaking the Evergreen story, and I was looking at all this race stuff going on, but there was this weird contention between the radical feminists and the trans rights activists. And I'm like, it was just like the left starting to eat itself and figuring out who's the bully inside of, who's the fascist inside of their ranks, So it was kind of like, you guys kind of did it to yourselves, but if you multiply that across the entire spectrum, or the entire left political spectrum, and you add this concept of the trans kid, it's such a magical, powerful concept, especially to empathetic, liberal women. That trans kid is, there's something holy about that. There's something Christ-like about saving that.
It's not only liberal women, Benjamin, because there are notable conservative families that are doing this to their children as well. So it's across the entire board. They what's the name of the child in Texas? I'm trying to Shapley, Kai Shapley. Kai Shapley, right? The backstory for Kai Shapley is that he was a gender non-conforming child, and his conservative parents were upset that it seemed inevitable that their son was going to be gay. And they would abuse him to try to get him to stop these behaviors that were effeminate behaviors. This was prior to his transition, right? Is it okay? Is it okay if I
talked about it?
I'd like to take this off.
Yeah, we can take.
Should we take our stuff off now and be more real? Maybe let me get rid of my background too. Now that we're at.
No, I'm gonna have crazy hair, but
you got some cowlicks over there.
Yeah, I do. Cowlicks and a
That's the problem, yeah. Didn't do much for my hair, putting that wig on, I'll tell you.
My mask is all tangled up here. Here we go.
Yeah, no, she did interviews for, I believe, Good Housekeeping.
The mom.
And some other magazines, basically saying spanking, 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 to try to get this kid to like trucks and all this. But her conclusion, and eventually the kid said, "Mom, I'm a girl." And to me, I don't know, it's like if I were a child who was punished constantly and was told only girls do that, only girls do that, only girls do that, eventually, I mean, this is a young child we're talking about, young. I would have said, okay, well, I guess I am a girl. Right?
And then the beating stopped.
Right. And now the kid has been on, I can't remember if it's a Netflix series. The kid is now a star and a little child activist in Texas now.
Or formerly of Texas. They left after the Attorney General and the governor there decided that
they left.
Investigating families was an appropriate way of dealing with this issue.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So I was going to bring up the why are moms spearheading this question, but we can save that for later. But the conservative response isn't always the best response, or at least the legislative conservative response. So what was happening in Texas? They decided to use that long arm of the law, right? To what?
There was
to go after,
a member of the Texas legislature had asked the attorney general to write an opinion or a memo on his interpretation as to whether or not transitioning children constituted child abuse. And the attorney general wrote a memo and clarified that, yes, it is a form of child abuse. And the governor took that memo and issued instructions to the various departments under his administration to start taking steps to investigate instances of child abuse, which in Texas meant investigating families that were transitioning their children and sending state agents to investigate individual citizens, which I think is just the absolute worst way of trying to do something about this whole issue.
Well, okay. So I can see a dystopian future right around the corner where red states call transing kids child abuse and blue states call not transing kids child abuse, and they both weaponize the CPS.
It's what's happening now.
It's what's happening.
It's
right.
current
So California, are you aware of what California just passed? And I think it was in reaction, right? So California has essentially made itself a sanctuary state for families and or minors, runaways. I mean, to me, it incentivizes running away. For transitioning. So, that's what we have now. I mean, it's analogous to abortion, right? I mean, some states are banning it almost completely, and some states have declared themselves sanctuary states. I mean, I don't really want to get into talking about abortion, but it's a similar polarization that's happening. And, sometimes I think about it and I think, well, if we're that divided, I don't think it's a great thing. But on the other hand, it kind of makes sense given where we are. Yesterday in Virginia, a Democrat introduced a bill that would define not affirming your child as child abuse. Yeah. Did you guys see that?
Well, that's what Canada's basically headed toward. Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got a huge battle going on now on the state level. Yeah. Can I bring up Florida? Because, so I agree with Corinna. The thing about it is when all the major medical organizations are telling doctors, this is what you're supposed to do, it's not that the doctors have no responsibility, but it does matter when the institutions in the country, the medical and psychiatric institutions are saying, hey, this is the way to, it's not just them, it's the federal government, the Biden administration. And our Assistant Secretary of Health is saying, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought now.
Florida.
So Florida is taking a different approach, and that is they have their angle is they've gone after Medicaid. They basically have said Medicaid doesn't allow experimental treatments. Okay, it just doesn't. They won't pay for experimental treatments. So DeSantis and his medical team, whatever you want to call, I forget what they're called, the health board, have basically said this is experimental. So in Florida, Medicaid isn't allowed to cover it. All hell broke loose. And I think I just saw a couple days ago that a court upheld it. Somebody sued immediately, but the court upheld. We'll see where it goes. Now, I'm not sure what I feel about this, but I feel it's a better approach than criminalizing doctors and families at the legislative level.
Cutting off money rather than persecuting people.
I guess so, yeah. And just saying this is experimental treatment and we're not covering it under Medicaid.
It's also requiring that the providers demonstrate that there is evidence for the care they're providing.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. Okay. But at some point, there's going to be a hard line, and there might be two sides of this line where to trans a kid is a human right, or to not trans the kid is child abuse, and to trans a kid is child abuse. But that's where we're headed. It's either child abuse or not. To surgically and hormonally alter the body of a minor as young as 11, 9, 12, 15, wherever.
8.
That is. 8. Yeah, it's
8.
happening. You can't say it's not happening. This stuff is happening. Mastectomies are happening. Puberty blockers are happening. This is not studied sufficiently, so the evidence hasn't been collected. If you look at how the evidence, if you even look at like the replication crisis, that's a whole other problem we have here. But either it is child abuse or it's not child abuse. And you could probably separate by the ideology of who thinks which way. You have one United States with all these different states making all these different laws, and then with California allowing this to happen, and with other places saying you can't allow it to happen. So people will just move and do it, and then either there's going to be a big bill, a reparations payout at some point. All these people, all these sterilized people coming, which is California is. I just learned the other day they paid out millions of dollars for sterilizing low IQ people or people that they deemed idiots, right? So, for literally sterilizing people who didn't, conform to normativity or something like that. So eventually it's going to happen, and I can just see the tug of war that's going to happen because child abuse is that's the basis of civilization, I think, is you don't harm kids. I think that's it's in the Bible for a reason. It's in the very beginning of the Bible for a reason. Like this is like the line where civilization starts or stops.
Yeah, but I guess I'm not sure we're going to get a federal. You're talking about it's going to be decided on the federal level. There could be a Supreme Court case that decides things. I guess I don't see that because I've watched a lot of the parents of trans kids, right? Mm-hmm. They feel just as strongly about this as we feel about it being not a good idea. And the truth of the matter is, a very uncomfortable truth, is that there are people like Nicole Maines. Do you guys know who Nicole Maines is? So Nicole Maines was one of SPAC's patients, a twin. She has a twin brother. Nicole Maines is now a movie star and was puberty blocked. There's a YouTube video of Norman Speck with Nicole Maines and family discussing And Nicole Maines says she's extremely happy. If you go, you can find Nicole Maines on Twitter, extremely motivated activist for child transition. Now, I just don't know that we're going to resolve this in any way, where it's going to come down on one side. Like you said, Benjamin, it's child abuse or it isn't. I just don't think it's going to come out that cleanly, because there's
agree.
more than one Nicole Maines in this world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, if you're presuming that Nicole Maines is happy, I don't know that I would accept that into evidence.
I don't know.
You could have asked me 10 years into my transition if I was happy, and I would have said, ecstatic, this is everything that I ever wanted. And it would have been, the clown mask, right? Or the some mask saying, yes, of course, this is perfect. And
okay, so now we're getting into the discussion of, is anyone happy who transitions? That feels like where you're going with this.
Is anyone happy? Well, is there anyone happy to begin with? And then we can go.
Let's start with that.
You cannot become happy with your transition if your goal is to change sex. If your goal is otherwise, if your goal is something else other than changing sex, you can be happy. If your goal is that you want to have big bouncy breasts and dress up in skimpy clothing and take photos of yourself and put them online, you could probably be happy doing that. But if your goal is to become a full-fledged, equal, valid, seamless member of the opposite sex, you'll never be happy. Because it's impossible.
Yeah. So I wonder about this generation of kids, though, that are transitioning. And I'm actually not disputing what you're saying. But, if from the time you're, 2 years old, and these parent groups that you see, they're toddlers, right? From the time they're toddlers, like, yeah, if it was a girl, you're a boy, you're a boy, you're a boy, you're a boy. You sort of go down the track that we know, right? Social transition. And I do believe it creates persistence. Right? And you just keep going and going and going. You may know that you're not literally a man when you get to the end of the medicalization road. But I just, we don't know yet, do we? What all these kids are going to think. Obviously, some are going to regret and feel like whatever, imposters, or I never got to where I really thought I should be. But I don't know. To me, don't you think the jury is still kind of out on this? No,
I don't. Well, I have a different point of view because of just, at the time I was considered a young transitioner. Now I would be considered a very old transitioning at 18, right? But you take some of these kids who are being transitioned at 4 or 5 or 6. What's going to happen is that these children, in every single context that they get into, every time that they move into a new school, every time they make new friends, every time they reach a certain milestone, they are going to be reminded of how they are not actually members of the opposite sex. There was a detransitioner who posted a video just this week of somebody who transitioned in as a teenager, a male detransitioner. And he was saying, yeah, every time I was asked if about my period, I had to say, I don't have a period because of these reasons. So you're constantly reminded of how you are different biologically at the level of your sex. You're constantly reminded that you are not a member of that target sex. That's going to happen whether these are toddlers being transitioned, teenagers. This is just going to be constant. You're never going to be allowed, but not even allowed. It's just not within reality that your biological sex will stop mattering. It is too fundamental to being a human being.
So you think the cognitive dissonance of that is going to be on some level is just that is going to create a lot of distress in some form or another. Yeah?
Well, I think it'll create distress, but even if somebody was able to manage the distress of it, it's still going to be there. It's still something that you always have to navigate. Let's say that you have, we keep on this path. It's maybe in California. Marci Bowers does a sex change surgery on a 16-year-old boy, vaginoplasty. I can tell you, and this was in that Reuters piece, there's something like 40% complication rate with vaginoplasty anyway, which those can be resolved through revision surgery. Something like 25% of vaginoplasties have revision surgery. I apologize, I don't have the article in front of me, but you can go.
Is this acceptable? Yeah. If boob jobs had only a 40% success rate, or 60% success rate, would they still be flouted as the thing to do, or nose jobs, or any of these other surgeries? It just seems pretty high. So
phalloplasty is way higher.
And it's at like the crux of your body. I mean, all the other issues aside, I mean, the place has got a lot of strain and stress and things going on in there too. So it's a major structural area. It's a literal groin of the.
You mentioned Marci Bowers. Would this be a time to talk about?
Well, Corinna, did you finish your point?
Let me finish this point really quick. You might be left with a beautiful, stunning looking young woman who's 19 years old, who, if you were to look at this individual undressed, would pass all visual inspection as a woman, would have the skeletal proportions of a within female range, masculine, but within female range. And this individual will still run into circumstances where his sex is going to be an important dynamic in many relationships, because he is a very womanly looking man. And that is, I'm not making any sort of social commentary about it, except for maybe using pronouns, I guess, is maybe social commentary. But that individual is still male. There's only a aesthetic that looks female, but there's no function to it. It is form without function. And that individual still has to navigate the world being functionally male with having some likeness or form that is female.
And whether or not that's distressing, it's still stressful. There's still a level of stress that's going to be constant. Yeah.
I'd love to see you and Nina get somebody like Nicole Maines on your podcast and talk about these things. It'd be, pretty fascinating.
I would have a lot of reservation doing that, though, Denise, because the amount of load, that mental load to confront stuff like this, it took me a number of years to be able to address these issues without feeling destroyed by it. In fact, I was destroyed by it. I've rebuilt myself in a way that I can handle talking about it. But to take one of these young people that's been through all of these people in their lives who have been lying to them about what is actually possible in the world, who've been telling them the lie over and over: you are a woman, no matter what anybody says about you. You are valid. You are the same as any other woman. Because we know that that's not true. But these individuals are going to have to handle going through the process of evaluating every person in their life who contributed to this false person. And they're still going to have to go through that process of having that little death the death of their ego and the death of everything that they've constructed as a woman, and work towards rebuilding that. And I can't bring somebody on my podcast and say, hey, this is what we're going to be doing this episode. Get some tissues.
Excellent. Thank you for that. It makes total sense. Do you want to? Is this? I just thought this would. Well, it just would be a segue to bring in Marci Bowers, who's for people who don't know, a pretty well-known gender surgeon, and did a Duke. I think it was some kind of a Zoom presentation with other clinicians, in which Bowers said that pretty much zero was the term. Every single puberty blocked person that Bowers had ever worked with or known was incapable of orgasm. And so Bowers had some answers to that. Okay, maybe we should block a little bit later. The kid never has testosterone. They have no sex drive. Let's tinker around the edges with when we start puberty blocking. And then the other thing was, and the kid needs to masturbate. The kid needs to know what masturbation is and what sexual pleasure is, so they know what they're aiming for, I guess, after all the treatment. A lot of us have been talking about this for several years. We did an article several years ago exposing a bunch of clinicians on Facebook saying, well, we don't really know if we're destroying sexual function. We don't know. Does anybody know? And now they're admitting it. Okay. So I don't know if we want to talk about that before I talk about the affirmative parent group. Should I go on?
Continue. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a week or so ago, we got some posts from this affirming parent group. We've got a mole in there, and the parents, they happen to be mothers. I didn't see in the unredacted posts any dads. They were all talking about, okay, we've got these puberty blocked boys. Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex toys. And they talked about their kids. Some of them were tweens, some of them were teens. That evidently the parents were talking openly with their kids about different kinds of sex toys. And I don't need to get into what the sex toys were, but it was sort of a long discussion they were all having. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we all probably know, a pretty famous congresswoman and quite controversial, somehow saw my tweet and quote tweeted it, and all hell broke loose, of course. And then an article was written in a publication called LGBTQ Nation, where they talked about this. They talked about the tweet. They talked about my tweet thread. They talked about her. She tagged the FBI, which I'm sorry, that's ridiculous.
Wow. But then some people the sex toy division of the FBI.
Yeah, right.
Okay, all right.
And in this thread, right, and in this thread, the parents were talking about. One of them said, "Oh, our vaginoplasty surgeon told us about this," and someone else mentioned Jazz. So Jazz and her parents, whatever, were on TV talking about the fact that Jazz didn't have an orgasm a couple of years ago, and they were laughing about it. That the parents said, "Oh, it's like a sneeze." Okay. So to me, seeing the thread is kind of bizarre, but to me, it just follows on from, what do you think happens if, Marci Bowers, she was or is the president of WPATH. Can't remember she's outgoing or incoming, but president of WPATH, right? Talking to other top clinicians in this Duke symposium. Like, do people not think that then other clinicians are going to talk about it and they're not going to talk about it with the family? Mm-hmm.
And Marci Bowers is also trans as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But on the one hand, it's internally consistent and logical, right? Okay, we would like these kids to eventually be able to have an orgasm. What are we going to do? Here's our solutions. Of course, when you look at it from the outside, you're kind of going, well, why don't you just stop doing this then? if you're risking someone's entire adult life of sexual pleasure, maybe you shouldn't be transitioning children, or at least don't puberty block them.
Could I comment on that for just
Please.
a moment, though, Denise? Do you know that you I'm sure have experienced this as I have, but if we bring up these issues for public discussion, Twitter being the default forum of discussion, if we bring these up, what do the trans activists say every time? Why are you so obsessed with children's genitals?
With children's genitals.
Why are you so obsessed with children having sex? Why are you talking about children masturbating? That's creepy.
Right, exactly.
Well, is it creepy or not?
It would be creepy if you were talking about a particular child masturbating. I think that would be creepy. Mm-hmm. If you're saying as a class that humans going through puberty have sexual maturation, and one of the things that people do as they grow towards adulthood is masturbate for sexual relief, and minors are included in that group that are doing it. I don't think that that's creepy. I think that that's just talking about sex education or human sexuality.
So why is it problematic that parents would be discussing this and how to navigate this with their child in a support group atmosphere where let's just assume that they're all looking out for their kids and not wanting to do anything inappropriate with their kids, but to facilitate a healthy development? And that because of this situation that they are in, whether they put themselves in it or the child put them in it, there needs to be a little extra care taken to this. That includes, I don't know what kind of molded plastic, but certainly molded plastic, probably battery operated as well. These devices, why would they not just kind of share tips and tricks and like, here's a thing that works and here's another thing that works?
Well, and so the thing is, what people tend to do is jump all over the parents, right? All of the responses are, oh my God, these creepy parents, call FBI, like these are creepy child abusing parents. I'm agreeing with you. It makes sense given the situation they are in. I mean, to me, the finger, and I always try to do this, ultimately, to me, the finger needs to be pointed at the clinicians and the institutions that have made this the norm, that makes the top gender surgeon in the country say, yeah, well, we're going to keep blocking these kids, but let's teach them to masturbate.
Okay, so there's the Munchie parents, the Munchausen parents, right? So we could discuss the motivations that would put parents into this, and maybe they're not all good. Maybe there are some parents who are
social
exercising
contagion.
Their social contagion, but also they're being good citizens by following the science. They're following the experts. So if that's the case, then the experts, how are they accountable? And what are they accountable to? You eventually get to, and this is kind of a theme I've been going through, you get to WPATH. You get to these standards of care. You get to these professional organizations that in many cases are releasing documents that are not really sound and are really suspect on top of that. Or they're like, I had Julia Mason on the other week, who is a pediatrician, and she was talking about the statement that the APA, or the American Pediatrics Association, released. They released this statement that was pro-trans kid, but they kind of backed away and they put it all on one guy. And it was just kind of this statement. And then James Cantor, who's also a controversial figure when it comes to this topic, he broke the whole thing down. So you see a lot of problems there, and you see a lot of ways that the institutions can completely deny accountability. Completely, the whole thing can be chalked up to social contagion, moral panic. But at the end of the day, either a child is abused or not abused. Right? And who is responsible for that? And who has to shoulder that responsibility? Who has to shoulder that if it is trauma? Maybe it's not trauma. Maybe they're not being abused. Maybe these special trans sex toys are the path for a certain number of these people these young people towards sexual health as medically transitioned adults.
If you as the parent have already decided, you're already on this path, right? You're already on the path. This is the right thing. If you don't do it, your kid's gonna, the live son, dead daughter thing. You're already on the path, and the professionals are now saying to you, hey, we really do think there may be a problem with adult sexual function. Here's some of the things you can do. Again, look, I have some problems with what some of these parents say, but at the same time, who wouldn't want their child to have normal adult sexual function? I mean, I'm not saying they're doing it the right way. I'm just saying I can understand within this bubble that they are in, and they egg each other on in these groups. Anybody who has so let me just say this last thing. I know you guys want to talk. When people have doubts in these groups, they'll go, well, I don't know. So with the Packers, the pediatric Packers, the fake penises, they get into it with that. They're like, oh, well, my kid is 12. Is that too young? Then they all jump in and they're like, oh, no, I got one when my kid was 8. Don't sexualize it. It's not sexual. It's like a prosthesis.
A sexual prosthesis? Jesus
no. Christ. They say it. No, it's not sexual. In fact,
it's literally a sex organ. I mean, how is that? I'm sorry.
I hope I don't sound like I'm defending them too much. I just get their logic.
I want the
bubble that they're in.
I want that. Corinna, what are your thoughts? There's a lot.
The parents. This is my impression. The parents who are discussing, because these are boys we're talking about. We're not talking about the girls. That's a whole set of other issues.
Yeah,
but we're talking about the boys who've had puberty blocked childhoods. The parents who are saying, how can we ensure that our daughters, their sons, are able to have some form of sexual function after they have their dicks cut off? Sorry for such strong language, but as a recipient of vaginoplasty, this is the language of my people. All right. These parents, in my opinion, they are going through a bargaining stage of grief. They are in denial that they are causing this harm to their child, because they know. They have heard people call this mutilation. I'm sure these parents have had frank discussions with each other, asking, are we doing the right thing? And that they are full of doubt. That they have come to believe that their only option is to cause this sexual dysfunction in their child, or else their child will kill themselves. They have probably reached that dichotomy and believe that it is a true dichotomy and not a false dichotomy. And when they are talking in public, false dilemma, excuse me. When they're talking about this in public, what are the last things that we can do to save the sexual function of our children? This to me is them processing their grief as denial and bargaining. It's nothing else, in my opinion.
Just to extend, it could be the case, I don't know all the situations of these parents in these parents groups, but it could be the case that this is pre-vaginoplasty, and so just on blocking testosterone, they are on child without testosterone, a boy without testosterone, the balls literally don't drop in a certain respect. Metaphorically don't drop. They do drop, but there's no growth. There's no sensation. Right. There's no orgasm. And subsequently, there's not enough to work with, so to speak, to invert that body part into the thing. So,
forget all of that. Forget all of that, Benjamin. This is like the wrong thing to focus on.
Okay, we're getting into the weeds. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not. We're getting into the weeds, but the depth of the vaginal canal after vaginoplasty is not going to be the main factor as to whether or not somebody who's had vaginoplasty is going to be able to orgasm. They are two completely separate issues.
Okay.
There are ways of constructing depth that are more invasive and damaging. That there are things they can do to solve the depth problem besides having penis growth in puberty. But for being able to have sensate orgasmic feelings, to be able to even develop that part, that is the main thing. And if they don't have the testosterone, if they're not going through puberty at all, if they're not having any excitement of that part of the nerve bundles, they're just not going to have anything that's like orgasm. Mm-hmm. And sorry for hopefully YouTube standards won't get too mad at me for saying this. You can stop me if it seems like it.
One wonders if, okay, so I guess this is another medical frontier then. How do we induce an orgasm in a sterile child or a boy? Like, is there like, do we shoot him with, is it like a sneeze and then you just jab, you have a sneeze and then you jab dopamine into your neck at the same moment? Like, or there's electrodes in the brain. I mean, it's not going to come down to a toy. It's going to come down to an entire cocktail of drugs
so to speak.
And neurostimulants to synthesize the orgasm. I see that's the future. It's to synthesize the orgasm.
That's more bargaining.
Isn't it interesting that Bowers in that Duke? I mean, I didn't watch the entire thing, but the part I saw, you don't hear Bowers saying, "Oh, and with some of my patients, we've gotten them to do this, and they're fine." You didn't hear that. It's like I'm not seeing any orgasms. Let's do this. So does it work or not? I don't know. Bowers did say something like the stimulus is still there. I mean, the sense I had from it is if you get them to do it, and that's what these parents are kind of saying. Let's get them to do it. That they're just the pure stimulation of those nerves is going to make it work. I mean, it's just so weird to even be having these conversations.
You think? Yeah. I want to go philosophical, but we don't have to. I'm just wondering if this was preceded by us forgetting what sex is for, right? What sex is for not having a telos at all for sex. Sex is purely hedonic pleasure. It has nothing to do with pair bonding. It has nothing to do with creating children. Those two things are off the board because those are moral impositions. The only thing sex is hedonic pleasure. And if you strip sex down to that, then it makes sense that you could just replace it. You can replace all the parts and you get your hedonic pleasure somewhere else. Or you synthesize the hedonic pleasure because there's no purpose. There's no purpose to being a man. There's no purpose to being a woman. And then the question would be, what is the meaning of life for a large part of a society to not have that, to not have childbearing, child rearing, and this is a whole can of worms. But how long can a society stabilize without the concepts of pair bonding and creating a family? And if one wonders if we got to this place because we put those things as sacred, and now we're losing our stability because we've lost the plot on that. That's just kind of some thoughts that I have on that. But that's kind of more...
Well, when I first discovered the sterilization angle, which was pretty early on, that puberty blockers followed directly by cross-sex hormones does tend to sterilize. And the top gender clinicians admit it. They talk about it. I thought, okay, that's it. We're done. You don't sterilize children. You just don't sterilize children. It's a human rights violation. Let's get this out to the public and everybody will scream and say, you can't do this anymore. But what I've noticed is people, that's not how they respond. A lot of people, they're like, there's too many kids in the world anyway. These kids are kind of advanced. They're going to adopt if they want to have kids. It's just shoved off, like it's of no importance. Kind of just speaking to your point, what have we lost? I mean, everybody shouldn't have children. It's not that everybody needs to have children, but to act like it's no big deal, to destroy the possibility of having children, In children?
Yes. And whether you want to have children or not tends to be something that you really zero in on when you are more mature.
That's right.
Most children, it's very unusual if a child wants to have children. Most children want to grow up. And then you start tackling that as a possibility. Not all children, not all girls have the option of reaching adulthood, obviously, but it's really only once you mature that you have a realistic outlook on whether or not being a parent is the right choice for you.
Yeah.
But if you're being transitioned, you're not, that choice is taken away from you.
Well, and you're not going to care when you're younger. I mean, you ask an 11-year-old who has been told, yeah, we're going to turn you into a boy, or the opposite, either way. You know, it might mean that you can't have children. So, right? I mean, one of the more interesting things I ever saw, and I wrote it up on the site, is Diane Ehrensaft did a Zoom session talking about this very issue. And she said quite openly, they are too young to understand. And in fact, you are burdening them if you try essentially too hard to get them to understand, but we're still going to do the transition because it's necessary.
Wow.
I have such a hard time understanding how someone can think like that, let alone pontificate about it.
Did you guys see that video that Julia Mason recorded at the American Pediatric Association event in Anaheim?
Ugh.
The actual event, not the protest outside, but the actual event. There was a female speaker, who was talking about a trans underage to 16-year-old trans male to female trans-identified individual.
Leela Alcorn.
Boldly placing themselves in front of a train, boldly standing standing in front of a train.
Yep.
Like this, I mean, just
martyr.
Just like
martyr.
It's so religious. It's just like the deification of death, the deification of anti-life. You're being antinatal in effect, and then you're worshiping suicide. You're using suicide as a threat. So at once you're using death and the fear of death to motivate a lot of this stuff, and then you're switching it over into some sort of righteous cause by death. It's Moloch. It's just so Molochian. It's just so.
Do you mind, because I've heard that a couple of times, Benjamin, the reference to Moloch, but I assumed it's some demon worship of some sort, but I don't know very much of the detail. Do you?
I would have to. It's an Old Testament reference to in the Hebraic Bible. There was one township, or what do they have? Villages or tribes? There was one tribe in that wasn't the Israelites, that the Israelites came across at some point, and they were worshiping this god called Moloch, who was this big statue of, I believe, a bull or a cow that the people would place these babies' bodies into in order to re-enliven the the fertility, or to bless the tribe, or to get protection. So it's just an ancient biblical reference to child sacrifice. And it seems to be the case that there's something about that again is, it's overlooked, but it's profoundly, deeply psychological, archetypal motivation. It's just a motivation in the darkness of our imagination. And I wonder, like, did we give up something to get to here? What did we lose along the way to get to here? What you were saying, Denise, about people being so flippant about the sterilization of kids, right? And I understand. I think I've spoken with either of you or other people about not using the term mutilation because that's too hard. But even sterilization is a really hard term. But that's kind of laughed off, or it's overlooked, because who really cares? I don't know.
So I want to make a comment about WPATH 8. And,
okay, so could tell us what WPATH 8 is, just
sure. Sorry. So the WPATH is we referenced it earlier, but it's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They release treatment and care guidelines, and they've released their 8th version of that, which in conversation is often called SOC 8, SOC 8. And there's a section in here where they have a number of statements that are concern the treatment of adolescents. And one of the statements is related to the clinician's responsibilities for being able to assess and understand an adolescent's emotional and cognitive maturity to be able to consent to treatment. This is, if you're curious about it, this is statement 6.12.c. And they talk about that in order for the clinician to assess informed consent, that there, if you don't mind, I'll read a paragraph here. A necessary step in the informed consent assent process for considering gender-affirming medical care is a careful discussion with qualified HCPs trained to assess the emotional and cognitive maturity of adolescents, the reversible and irreversible effects of the treatment, as well as fertility preservation options when applicable, and all potential risks and benefits of the intervention are important components of this discussion. These discussions are required when obtaining informed consent assent. Assessment of cognitive and emotional maturity is important because it helps the care team understand the adolescent's capability to be informed. So I'll just stop there, but I want to raise a point that when we're talking about 8-year-olds, 8-year-olds cannot reach the point of having those sorts of discussions. Probably 10-year-olds cannot reach the point of having those discussions. Probably 12-year-olds cannot really understand the benefits and disadvantages of these treatments. And you can probably keep ratcheting that age up just by adding a few more extra like provisos. How socially mature is this person? What is their cognitive processing level at? And if they have any sort of cognitive delays or problems, that age needs to be 14 or 15 or 16 or even 18. And even though it seems clear to us that adolescents just cannot form the picture of themselves as adults to be able to understand the repercussions of these treatments, and even though it is clear in these standards of care that in order to provide informed consent, that the clinicians themselves need to have these discussions and have confidence that these patients have this capability, we know that in general, and it is widely the case, that adolescents cannot imagine the consequences of these treatments. And we know this because every single week now, there's a new detransitioner who sometimes they start in their later teens, who will tell us that the doctors didn't inform me, or I didn't understand it, or I misunderstood it, or I didn't care at the time because I couldn't imagine.
Or I was depressed, or I was autistic, or...
Yes, all of these things. So we know from WPATH that informed consent is required to provide these treatments. And then we also know, just from what we know about adolescent psychology, that these kids cannot really constructively give consent to these treatments.
Can I add more grist to your mill?
Please.
This is on the website Dying with Dignity Canada. I'm going to read a paragraph.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Dying with Dignity Canada acknowledges that Canadian society will likely expect a minimum age for mature minors in the legislation. for assisted suicide, even though the emphasis at common law is on capacity and maturity and not chronological age. For this reason, Dying with Death Canada asked that Parliament amend the existing age requirements of 18 years of age to extend it to persons at least 12 years of age and capable of making decisions with respect to their death.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Barry Weiss has covered this the other day.
Somebody had to write that.
So
they didn't have to write that. Somebody did write that, and there is a human hand that composed that.
No, it was a committee, I'm sure.
That is.
It's a lobbying group.
It is hard to find a word, a descriptor for that, other than the word evil. I just don't know. I don't know what else.
How did we get here? I mean, back to this big philosophical question. I mean, and we probably can't answer it, but I mean, that we can talk about the different elements that led to this. But it just kind of blows my mind, because I had this for my master's degree. I studied a lot of developmental psychology and a lot of neuroscience and that kind of thing. And it's like, this has been a well-known fact. Well, even recently, they've upped the age for maturity. For a long time, it was like, oh, yep, you're 18 and you're an adult. Well, actually, it turns out, with all the brain studies and so forth, you don't have all of your executive function until you're about 25 years old. We know this. It's replicated. We know it's objective evidence, MRIs, everything. And then in the same time period, though, we're saying that adolescents can do all these things. I really don't understand how we got here. Do you?
I don't know. I mean, every answer that I can think of is just very simplistic. But human hubris, I mean, it's probably ancient, it's just mankind's will over nature, right? Or the loss of some sort. I don't want to bring up religious language, so I'm just going to say the loss of a connection with reality in some way, shape, or form. I just got an 8-week-old kitten. I brought him home. I have a 2-year-old kitten, a cat, right? And the first time they met, I was like, Bodhi, the older cat, he eats everything this size. He eats gophers and marmots and all these things. How is he not going to eat the cat? And as soon as he saw the cat, they started a power dynamic. He knew right away that this is my kind. And they're going to get in tussles and stuff, and they're going to take a while to get along and stuff. But he knew right away that this is not something that he's going to kill. So somehow we have lost that. Somehow that's a part of nature. Somehow that's a part of reality, to not kill kids.
Okay, but how do we get from top neuroscientists?
Just one little. I will get this kid fixed, so I'm going to mess with his sexual function, just to be completely clear. So make of that what you will. But that's because it's an animal and not a human. This reminds me briefly of an anecdote. Somebody on Twitter a couple of weeks ago said of detransitioners, well, why do you have to take hormones at all? Because we have our pets fixed and we don't put them on hormones. And I said, yeah, that's because we have our pets fixed because it serves us as human beings to do so. And we don't have, it's more convenient for us to do this to our animals. And we treat humans differently than we treat animals. That's why. And to his credit, he was like, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." But it's so funny that just wasn't intuitive.
Right. To ask again, sort of the same question, particularly in the field of psychology, because these things are simultaneous. The understanding that the frontal lobes aren't fully developed until later than we thought. This isn't like, oh, people thought that 50 years ago, but now this is simultaneous, this understanding about brain development. And at the very same time, all these psychologists are going, well, they know, the kids know. and that even to the point, that you brought in to commit suicide. It's like, how can these two things exist at the same time in the field of psychology?
Institutional.
What happened to these gender therapists? Like, what happened to them?
Well, where do they come from? I still haven't found that answer. They just kind of appeared overnight.
Where they came from?
No, the gender therapy just like kind of sprung up.
Another planet.
The institutions have lost their ethics. It's insulated. We'd have to go into talks of constitutional monarchy and the role of the effect of religion on institutions, and can an institution function without a religion, and what kind of religion is functioning within our institutions. I don't think an institution can function without a religion, which means just a codification of moral belief. And the institution itself is selecting for and reinforcing people who adhere to these forms of belief. So the institution will manipulate data and will manipulate standards of care in order to affect its morality. The morality is leading the charge, and it always has been leading. So somehow the morality changed to allow this to happen.
Well, and that kids are wise. Even toddlers are wise.
I think your clump of cells in your womb knows its gender. I think there was somebody seriously saying that a child before it's born knows its gender.
Yeah.
I saw that, but it's tempting to ignore things like that because I just don't want to credit that anybody means that seriously.
But somebody's taking them seriously.
Where'd they get the idea? Where'd they get the idea?
As somebody who's...
I mean, it is right that...
So kind of to kind of turn the arc of our conversation from diagnosing a problem, discussing a problem, kind of trying to diagnose it. I don't think we can. I think that it's just a huge project to try to really diagnose it. But there are just tactics and strategies, and I see that both of you have a moral compass when it comes to dealing with this stuff, right? Because you're both engaged in this conversation, and you both can make moral claims on how blue states going about doing things and red states going about doing things, and how online activists, which all of us are for better or worse, or God save our souls, are doing. How can we approach this? What are we doing? What kind of gains have you guys made? How do you want to affect the discourse? Do you want more Marjorie Taylor Greene retweets, or would you want AOC to retweet you? Is that what you really want AOC, Denise, right?
You mean when hell freezes over? When hell freezes over. Yeah.
I would like more serious people to take me seriously. And having the attention of unserious people is of no value. In fact, it is painful if unserious people pick up on the things that I'm saying. Who's
a serious person? Joe Biden? A powerful person? What do you mean a serious person?
I think when Joe Biden was younger, he was moderately serious. But I think anybody who has some background in policy, who has had to successfully negotiate to get policy passed, has understood through trial and error what works and what doesn't, somebody who has some sort of background in history and politics, and is well-rounded, and somebody who's more of a statesman. And I think that there are politicians in both parties who would meet those sorts of qualifications. It's less likely to find those people in the House presently because it's a popularity contest to get into the House at this point. But I do believe that they're in the House, likely in the Senate as well. They're out there, but right now this is such a culture war item that the people who are less interested in the solutions and origins of the causes and problems aren't invested in it. And I personally would not want Marjorie Taylor Greene to be my advocate on this issue in the House.
You want a executive branch? You want Ron DeSantis or a Gavin Newsom?
I think that somebody in the executive branch actually is in a better position to be required to represent their constituents on this issue. So I think that wouldn't be the worst thing. But even the Democrat who represents my district is Andre Carson. And he's a quiet member of Congress. Nobody really knows who he is because he's not making the news every week saying stupid things. But he's been in there for 10 years or so doing the work and contributing to the party. I would love to have some of his attention. But not these partisans who are out there trying to chip off public attention and drive up the level of partisanship.
Mm-hmm. So are you going to go
that? Go ahead.
Sorry, briefly, are you going to go to your local governor's mansion, or are you going to go to your local legislator rather than the Pride event and kind of walk up there and set a brief on their table?
Who says I haven't been trying? I just these sorts of moves are not the best thing to publicize a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt you, Denise. What were you going to say?
No, it's okay. It's a lot to think about. I think I might have mentioned in our other interview that the Peak Resilience Project, which had a brief life, that they did go to Washington and they did talk to only Democratic politicians because most of the Republicans already agree with the basic position. And they had a lot of success. I think that kind of thing can have value, but I don't, fighting the whole partisan thing, that Corinna refers to, I don't know. I'm wondering what's going to happen if the Republicans take the Congress. I mean, I predict that they will have wall-to-wall hearings about this issue because it is the hot issue right now. They'll bring in all the clinicians. They'll hammer people like Rand Paul has done repeatedly to Rachel Levine. And I just wonder what will be the ultimate outcome. Will it be, those horrible Republicans, look at that, they hate trans kids? Or if the GOP takes the Congress, will it be a chastening event? Will some Democrats go, maybe we have gone too far on this? I don't know.
When the detransitioners get more and more attention, and as I said, without exaggeration, I'm seeing a one or two new detransitioners or regretters every week at least. But it's increasing, and we already knew that it was going to be increasing. We already knew that this trend was going to happen. It's happening. Those are the people who are going to have the message.
Absolutely.
They're not Republicans. They're not Democrats. They're people who were damaged by the process of gender affirming care, and they are ready to explain what happened to them and how to stop other kids from being hurt by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they have standing in a way that no one else does.
That's right.
I think my method or my hope is that just to expand the outcomes or expand the consciousness of the consequences so that young people can think a little bit more, parents can think a little bit more about this. And you're right, it is a cultural issue, and I try not to engage with that so much. I'm trying to engage with that less and less because it has downstream effects for my goal, but trying to just put stories in the path of people so that they can just kind of think things through, and pray to God or just hope that thinking about this rationally or relaxedly is going to feel good more than being in a panic about it and kind of making all these decisions and then ending up on a Facebook group talking about how you're trying to give your kid an orgasm or whatever, like you were saying, ending up in this spiral of grief, regret, bargaining and stuff like that. If we can slow down and just tell these stories, I know it's really inconvenient for the so-called trans community to have these stories out there, but I think that they're necessary and ultimately is good for the so-called trans community. I mean, maybe they'll lose some Instagram status or influencer status, but they can adapt. They can be doing their popularity contest without the outcomes that it's having at this point.
And I wonder how long the U.S. can hold out when so many other countries are starting to slow things down. I mean, I'm surprised there hasn't been more of an effect, frankly, already.
Well, the United States government is such a huge juggernaut that what we're seeing now is probably the effect of 20, 15 years of things happening behind the scenes, right? And we've traced trans rights through the gay rights movement and just how the institution needed a new cause, so it just kind of fit right in there. And I've spoken with people in the deep state, so-called, who are totally on board with the trans kid thing. Not really, they're insulated and they're reinforced. They really do see fascists when they see parents at school board meetings. They really see fascists. They really see fascists when they see Trump supporters. They really see fascism when they see people that don't like the State Department and don't think that they have America's normal population in their own best interests. It's two worlds. We're living in two worlds. And
it's the problem with echo chambers. Everybody's living in their little echo chamber.
And it's massive. I'm saying it's massive. This echo chamber is not just a social media phenomenon. It's the entire civil service of the United States government is caught in an echo chamber and they've erected pylons to sieve people out who don't agree with them with the DEI, SEL, CRT, gender ideology. All this stuff is there to sieve out people who don't get on board and can't be a good little toady for the bureaucracy. So I really don't think that it's a small issue. I think it's a huge issue. And it might be the case that feedback from the populace reaches them and they slow their roll, so to speak. It has to happen, especially. And I think that you're right that the detransitioners are going to provide just unignorable evidence of the outcome of this stuff, and that some people are going to have to be tempered who do have power and do have policy. And yeah, there's going to be political games, but with people gaining status by riding the opposite wave and stuff. But ultimately, it's the statesmanship. But I don't even know if that exists anymore. I don't know if we have true statesmen. Maybe that's like a Scotsman. There's no such thing as a true one.
I hope we do.
Well, I think the midterms are going to be very instructive, I think. Well,
we'll see if they have a Roe-vember or a... I don't know the other pun. So, Denise, Fourth Wave Now, plug your work. Do you have a podcast yet, or this is just your second one? Have you gone? Have you cheated on me, or are you still staying true to the Benjamin Boyce only?
So far
on my channel. Okay.
So far.
So you run Fourth Wave Now,
that's
which
not
is
true. I went on
blog.
Gender Wider Lens. You're talking about. I went on Gender Wider Lens.
I'll share you with them.
You didn't watch? Oh my God.
Sorry, I create too much content to watch.
Yeah, it's okay. What was the question?
Plug your work. Plug your website. It's 8 years
so the
in the
website,
making. Yeah.
As most people know, there hasn't been as much action on there recently. I joke that I trick myself into writing articles on Twitter. I just write them in however many characters we have now. What is it? Used to be 140. Is that? I just write 240 characters, and all of a sudden I have an article.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where mostly stuff is happening right now, despite ambitions to the contrary. Right now.
But you're covering. What are you covering, and how are you covering it? I want to put it in your own words.
Well, I mean, some of it is current events, kind of what's happening. I mean, I also feel it's a lot of retweeting people who don't have, like, there's a new account I just saw called Puberty Blockers Suck. I just saw that. They just came on. Well, they just came online a month ago, and and what they say is survivors of whatever puberty blockers and something. So I boosted them because I'm like, oh. this is cool. Sometimes I feel like that's what I like doing the most, you know, is there's lots of people talking about this now. Look at these people, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, sort of covering current events and commenting. I don't know what the future is going to hold. Sometimes I think I'm done with this. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, I'm not done with this at all. So I'm kind of a little uncertain about what the future holds. But I hope that you'll put, I referred to Diane Aronsaf's Zoom session where she actually talks about that the younger people don't have the capacity to understand what they're doing, but do it anyway. I hope you'll put that link up.
In the description, you just have to
easily.
send it. I'll have you send it to me. So that will be in the description, as well as links to your Twitter and to Fourth Wave Now blog. And Corinna, what are you up to?
Well, I am a co-host of a podcast with Nina Paley, and it's called Heterodorx, Heterodox Dorks. We have just published our 78th episode. I can't believe it's gone on for this long, but we have a full slate of guests ahead of us, and it just gets bigger every single week. And my hope is pretty soon we're going to push all the way through 100 listeners. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
That'll be linked in the description, but it's spelled with an RX right at the end.
It is.
Yeah.
Heterodorx with an X. Yeah. And I also have started a Substack, all the cool people who were doing it. And I thought it's stale and dull now, so it's my perfect opportunity to jump in. You can find that at corinnacohn.substack.com.
And you're also on Twitter, but not as yourself, you're as a representative of Heterodorx.
That's right. I have commandeered the podcast's Twitter account, and now I use it to stir up conversations on the gender issue.
Getting a little gender gadfly.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's weird that it used to be that a popular tweet for me would be like 12 likes, and now I can just accidentally swipe something on the keyboard and post it on accident, and it gets like 50 retweets. It's
ride confusing. That wave. You got to be that influencer.
The right time, right place in the right time. That's all that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes whether you want to or not, like when Marjorie Taylor Greene quote tweeted me, it jumped up to 2,000 likes in about 2 hours. It's like, okay, then.
Last question that I'm probably going to have to cut out because we don't want to talk about. Should we talk about our hater? Wait, Corinna, are you also on the hit list? No.
The hater? I don't. Everybody loves me, Benjamin. There's no. I have no haters.
We don't have.
Do we want to give the hater though any air?
I just love it because they made this beautiful beach towel of me looking like Billy Bob Thornton. It was just like this beautiful thing. They actually purchased the website domain Benjamin A. Boyce and wrote up this really long introduction that totally mocks me. It's just, and it links to all of my Twitter. It links to all of my stuff. It's just
that's
great.
The irony, isn't it? I mean, mine reads like a resume that I don't have a problem with for the most part.
I know.
But all the caricatures, everybody has like the eyebrows up like this, the evil eyebrows. You know?
Am I on there?
Are you on there?
I don't know.
I don't think I am.
She who shall not be named created this.
Yeah.
Needs no oxygen.
Yeah. No oxygen. Starve.
You might, Corinna. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, we'll find out. But
we'll have to send it to you.
If please make sure that you get my Jewish features in the.
Can you scowl? Can you scowl for the portrait?
They sure did that.
I'm too happy to scowl. Wait, read back the part about Canada allowing suicide for 12-year-olds again. That'll do it.
There was a bit of.
Yeah. There was. I think I covered my face in horror though. So. Yeah, I'm just trying to squeeze out the jokes about killing 12-year-olds.
Yeah, well, what we're going to do, You got to leaven the bread somehow. You got to lighten up the room somehow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were probably, just in an assisted suicide camp. And that's when the Spirit of God came to them and told them, no.
Or they were trans and it was the only option, right?
It was the only option. You either have a living mediocrity or a dead martyr, right?
That's right.
Okay.
No,
Let's wrap it up.
The mask is going back on. Okay.
Yeah, thank you guys both very much for this. Hopefully nobody takes us seriously for the first 20 minutes and then totally takes us seriously forever after more.
Indeed.
Say goodbye to the folks at home.
Goodbye, folks at home.
There we go.